but women can be translated wives or women. And so there's just this
Which has
debate.
always made me chuckle about Greek and Hebrew as well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the way they referred to their husbands and wives was literally to say, my man and my woman.
I know. I love it. My man ain't doing it.
You're listening to Rhythms of Grace, a podcast of Grace Fellowship Church in McClenny, Florida, with pastors Nathaniel Simmons and Joel Griffis. You can find out more about Grace Fellowship Church at www.gfcbaker.org.
Always feel
Are
like,
we
man, I want to
recording?
jump in. I know. So this is our second podcast, the first one that I've hit record on, which is a big bummer. Joel, have you forgiven me yet for last week?
Oh, yeah. I forgave you immediately. But let's
Good.
go back to that topic at some point that we were talking about last week, because we talked about a whole different topic in our non-recorded
That's
podcast
right.
last week about
That's right.
ethical systems and frameworks, and it was a cool topic, so
I
I
thought
don't
so
want to
too.
lose that.
Jesse and Darcy especially, several people have been like, y'all got to get back to podcasting, and we've been saying it, and finally we're like, we're going to make it happen. And so the first thing we talked about was ethics, like you said, and what makes an act good or bad, and how can we become good people? How can we grow in the way we think about morals? And we thought about just re-recording that, but since then, Deb and Caitlin, my own mom, have brought up something that's kind of a current event in the religious world, and we thought we'd maybe just pocket the ethics one and talk about women pastors.
All right. Before we get to that, I'll just say a note again on kind of how we're rebooting this podcast.
Do that.
So, like what we did in the past, the format that we followed was to do kind of a sermon review thing where whoever preached the week prior, whether it was you or me, we would just go over the content of our sermon again and maybe talk about any little bonus material or tidbits that we wanted to add into and just kind of bounce back and forth. But this time, in this new season of the show, we're going to do more of a topical approach. So it'll really just kind of be a lot of listening out for the kinds of things people are talking about and interested in, whether that's broadly online or specifically in our own church context and conversations we have with people. So it'll be a lot more open-ended in that way, but hopefully interesting at the same time. And I think it will be. So that's the reboot.
One of the things that means that Jesse really kind of said, you should really consider doing it this way. And so we thought, yeah, good idea. We'll give it a try. Not every topic will be equally expert on, but we'll do our best to do
we'll pretend
what we know
anyway.
and at least have hopefully a helpful conversation. And the other thing that means is if you have things you want to hear us talk about, then let us know. Really, there's nothing completely off the table. So just if we think it could be edifying for anyone in our church, then we'll do it. And so let us know if there's things you're interested in. Yeah, that's all.
Real quick tidbit. I see your database shirt that you're rocking. I don't know if that joke originated with Nate Bargatze, but I've seen it like associated with him at times. Like we went to see his movie the other night, and they were showing like dad jokes like beforehand in the theater, and that was one of them. Something about keeping your jokes in a database. But anyway, it made me think of Nate Bargatze, and I don't know if you saw that he was under fire a little bit because he showed up at a White House event where there was a lot of conservative politicians and stuff that he took some pictures with and things like that. So it's just, that's the world we live in. You can't do anything like that without getting criticized.
Right. And I don't know how much that bothers him because I feel like he has tried to be just neutral. Not that he isn't who he is personally, but he just tries to be a person that is not offensive and
Yeah.
heated and causing debate. And so it's like, well, no, you're gonna be in the midst of it. You're
Yeah.
like, you can be
You
as
can't
neutral as you
escape.
want. We're gonna make you be this way.
Yeah. Which I think there's a lesson in. Like,
Yeah.
I always think of the line in The Lord of the Rings where one of the hobbits in the Shire says, "Keep your nose out of trouble and no trouble will come to you." But like the whole idea of the movie going forward is that's not true. Like trouble is going to come to you, and so
I
got to
have
be
never
prepared.
thought about that. That's a really good observation. I remember that line. And I guess it's kind of contrasted with, and I can't quote it exactly right. You probably can. Gandalf saying, Frodo says something to the effect of, "Well, I wish this never came to me." And he says, "All good men do, but you can't really control what comes to you. You can only control how you respond." But Gandalf
Right.
said it in a good way.
There's another quote. Sorry, they just keep coming to me.
Do it.
Later on, King Theoden of Rohan says, "I will not risk something like I will not risk open war," and Aragorn just speaks up very very matter of factly and says, "Open war is upon you, whether you would risk it or not."
Yeah.
And it's just cool. It's cool.
So anyway, Nate Bargatze, sorry that you found out that.
Yep.
We're in
Open war is upon him, whether he would risk it or not. So.
Funny. Well,
God
that was
bless
unexpected
Nate
but fun.
Bargatze.
Hey, is your cup just completely white? There's no like logo
Nope,
or
it
anything?
is
Edward, hey,
my
look,
retirement cup.
we're both in finance world. Mine's getting old now. First
Yep.
Federal.
I had to give a lot of money to get this mug.
Well, I don't know if Jamie Hodges will ever watch this, but if you do, look, your logo's about wore off my mug, so you can give me another one day.
Shout out to Matt. Shout out to Matt Putney from me.
All right. Well,
I guess they don't mind being named on our show.
No, they don't
That's
even go to our
watched by
church.
millions.
All 5 people that watch this will now know who you are. The chances that they ever hear it is pretty low, but we'll see. Anyway, all right. So let's talk about how this conversation came up to me. My mom, I could just pick anybody to use, but I'll use my mom just for the sake of the conversation. She calls me up the other day and says, "Okay, I'm reading these things about the Southern Baptist Convention doing this amendment about women," and they say like that it's kind of this anti-woman thing, and like I don't know anything about it. What's going on? Can you give me a quick summary of the situation? Deb Stevens asked a similar question. I think she was probably a little bit more familiar with the context. Caitlin, I just think a lot of people are seeing all over the internet, Southern Baptist Convention has wrestled with and voted upon, and we'll talk about what they voted in a minute, an amendment that would limit women as pastors, and that sort of has spun out into all kind of other conversations. We are not a Southern Baptist church. You and I both went to a Southern Baptist seminary.
Yeah.
So I think it's fair to say we both have interest in it. It's something that we
Exposure
care about.
to it.
Yeah, we're exposed to it. But it's not like we're not directly affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention as a church. So this is more of a one step removed. Just what do you know about it, and how would you summarize it?
And you have to recognize too, I mean, I've always heard, believe it's true, Southern Baptists are the largest Protestant denomination in the country.
Yeah.
And so that there's some weight to the fact that this is a conversation that they're having.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. If this was something like the Idaho particular Baptist of missionary endeavors or whatever, you'd be like, yeah, this is like 47 people are having this controversy. It's not like that. This is the largest Protestant denomination.
Yeah.
Do you want to, or do you want me to summarize the basic process going on?
All I did was, other than just the general things I kind of caught from hearing people talk about it online, is that it was an amendment, and I can't remember how much of this you said. I was trying to send a text, but it was an amendment at the Southern Baptist Convention proposed by Al Mohler, who is the president of Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. It was known as the Truth and Unity Amendment, and it is a constitutional amendment that basically wants to add a certain item in one section of the Constitution that specifies that cooperating Southern Baptist churches, and here's the quote of the amendment, or a cooperating Southern Baptist church does not act to affirm, appoint, or endorse a woman serving in the office or function of a pastor/elder/overseer, such as preaching to the assembled congregation. So I just pulled that from Al Mohler's own little write-up about it on his website.
Okay, let me throw one thing in there real quick. That word "such as" was the original language. They actually changed that to specifically, and so that could be a point of conversation for us.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about why in just a second.
A couple of things that could be focused on there in that statement and points of conversation. But
so let me throw in a little bit of extra. I don't know that this is necessary. This is the Southern Baptist Convention. Has a constitution just like any organization does. And the third article of the Constitution is titled Composition. And it basically are the rules that determine who can and can't be considered a member, which churches can be members in good cooperation with the convention. There are currently 5 rules. So it's Article 3. You can think of it the same way in our own Constitution. Like, in order to be a member, we have under membership, the qualifications for membership, and we have 6 articles for us. You have to go through, you have to be a believer, you have to be baptized, you have to do a new members class, you have to come in front of the church and be presented. I think there's one other, I forgot it. Anyway, we just list out, this is how you become a member, this is the process, this is the criteria. Same thing for the Southern Baptist Convention. They apply that for every church. The 5, I'll give summaries of the first 3 because they're kind of long. The 5 that already exist are that your faith and practice closely aligns with the convention's adopted statement of faith. So the Baptist Faith and Message is a statement of faith. That's going to be relevant, I think, in the conversation in just a second. And I'll just tell you why. The Baptist Faith and Message already says that you have to be a male to be a pastor. So part of the reason people say, well, this is unnecessary because point 1 already says this, just not explicitly. And so part of the debate came, do you need point 6 to basically reiterate something that was implied in point 1? So you have to agree with the statement of faith, which already says male pastors. Second, you have to you formally approved its intention to cooperate. So the church basically has to fill out a paper that says we want to be part of the Southern Baptist Convention. You have to make undesignated financial contributions. So if our church one day decides we want to be Southern Baptist, we have to fill out an application, but we have to make some sort of regular donation to the Southern Baptist Convention. It says it's unspecified. It doesn't say how much we have to make, but being a part of the Southern Baptist Convention, basically you have to give money to that convention. The 4th and 5th are a little bit more recent additions. So those were the original 3 kind of in the Constitution, to my knowledge. The 4th one says that you cannot act in a manner inconsistent with the convention's beliefs regarding sexual abuse. So basically, recently they said, if your church is pro-sexual abuse, which I've never heard of a church that is, but if you're pro-sexual abuse,
you act in a way that that defends sexual abusers or covers up sexual abuse.
Right. Yeah. That's right. So that would be, I think, hard to determine because every church would say, well, we're not pro-sexual abuse. This situation would be different. But there's some broad thing there that says you can't be pro-sexual abuse. The last one, number 5, says you cannot affirm, approve, or endorse discriminatory behavior on the basis of ethnicity. So basically,
racial discrimination.
Racial discrimination. And this is because the Southern Baptist Convention in its early days was before the Civil War. The Southern Baptist Convention was Southern before the Civil War, and they were on the side of the South, which endorsed slavery. And so basically this was, I think, part of that. Hey, we were wrong, and we believe not only was that wrong, it was disqualifying in participation with the Southern Baptist Convention. So this new one will add to participate. The Sixth Amendment would say, in order to participate, all of those things still apply, and your pastor cannot be a woman. So you don't affirm, appoint, or endorse women serving in the office or function of pastor, specifically preaching to the assembled congregation. Real quick, if you were a messenger, you had to vote on this. Would you have voted for or against? For it or against it?
I try to understand all possible ways of looking at something. So in my mind, I think there's probably a lot of people who voted no that are just not in step with me in the spirit of it. Like they are just pro women pastor, period. I think somebody could also vote no if they just deemed that the statement was not clear enough, or maybe didn't go far enough, or would be unhelpful in some practical sense later on down the road. I don't know, but that's the only sense in which I could say that it's possible I could have voted no if I felt that way, but not really being part of the convention and knowing how it operates, and just kind of going to my gut feeling. Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, it certainly, it certainly is consistent with my own views of who should be a pastor. So,
I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's a really good point. We talk about this in our own new members class sometimes. If we ever have a vote and you decide to vote no, you mean any one of our church members, there's nothing in voting no that tells us why you voted no. Right. And so what we ask is, sometimes it can feel like, I don't want to be controversial. I don't want to create conflict. But I think that what would help us move forward usually is finding out why as a church. But you can't do that when you're talking about a whole convention with thousands and thousands of churches and representatives. I think, how many people were there? Something like 15,000. I might be wrong on that number, but it was a massive amount of people.
Thousands at least.
So you can't really know why everybody voted. Just to say this, what was the final vote? It passed. You needed 66%.
I think it was 74 something, 74 point something.
For a constitutional amendment in the Southern Baptist Convention, you need what they call supermajority, which is at least 2/3 to vote yes, and it was closer to 3/4, right? 75%.
Yeah.
So it was a heavy vote. Of that 25% who voted no, the reasons by which they voted no, like you said, there could be a whole number of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I'm with you. I probably would have voted yes. There's some reasons that somebody would say no that I would say, well, I don't really agree with you there. There's some no reasons that I would be like, well, I mean, I maybe don't see it completely the same, but I can understand that no. You want to throw out some reasons why people might have voted no in your mind?
Well, just what I kind of briefly mentioned a second ago, which I didn't really go into detail, but I could say maybe somebody thinking that it restricts women to an unnecessary degree, that even if the wording of it itself does not restrict women unreasonably, could be used down the road in some way to restrict them unreasonably, or that it's not clear, or the whole such as language. I guess that was talked through and determined, but in the case of a phrase like that, such as, you give one example, preaching to the congregation, but it kind of implies that there's more that they can't do too, but it doesn't really define those things. So I guess that's probably the reasoning of why they went with the word specifically instead of such as. But I don't know. You can kind of come up with multiple
did you
potential
ever see
ideas, I guess.
the Miss Teen South Carolina, who has to do an interview of, I can't even remember what her question was, but she says like and such as like, and then it's like, so whenever I see such as, I always think of her. The specifically wording there, I think that there were a handful of people who didn't like that for two different reasons. So basically what the article says is that women can't be affirmed or endorsed as pastors in Southern Baptist churches. Specifically with reference to the task of preaching to the assembled congregation.
Yeah.
So some people, I think, believe that was too small, right? Like that is one defining task of what a pastor does, but it's not the only thing. And so they would say, no.
Yeah.
What you're doing is making it where like, well, maybe this kind of pastor, but not that kind of pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And so they didn't like that it was too narrow. They wanted a more broad statement.
Mm-hmm.
There's other people I think that would have liked it to say, well, specifically preaching, but you could preach and not on occasion or something like that and not really feel. So they just felt like it could be too restrictive.
Mm-hmm.
Some people felt like it was not restrictive enough. That's almost always the case in a statement, is that people can imagine it being interpreted wrongly and therefore they're afraid to make a statement. Period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Either way you go, you're going to get some people that don't feel great about it because of either wording you decide on. Yeah.
So I read a interview that Al Mohler did a couple things, but one that Al Mohler did with the 9 Marks guys, which is Mark Dever and his group at the Southern Baptist Convention. It's really a news article that just had quotations of it, and he talked about that specifically thing and where that language came from, why they used that. And he says, essentially, the issue is always defining words, right? So when I say, no, pastor, you're going to say, well, what do you mean by pastor, right? And he says, if I just use the word pastor, does that mean senior pastor? Does that mean teaching pastor? Does that mean youth pastor, children's pastor? What does that mean? And so it layers in, or it allows for a level of ambiguity on what you mean by the word pastor versus what I mean by the word pastor. And so they felt like, okay, we need to give some sort of tangibility to what we mean when we use the word, even if individuals might mean more. If we don't give something with some level of specificity, right, specifically, then it could be so general that it becomes pointless. It becomes unhelpful. And so I still think there are many Baptists that would say we would prefer not to use the word pastor for women, generally speaking. But he says specifically when you think of the word pastor, you're thinking of people who have a regular teaching position in front of the congregation, that you are the one who delivers the sermons when the congregation assembles. And that's what we mean by pastor. So it doesn't mean you're the only one. There could be a group of people who do that. In our case, you and I are the ones who regularly preach at the church. That doesn't mean that he would say there's no other things that pastors do. And he goes on to say that pastors do other things other than teaching. But that is, one is, I think when we look at text, you'll see that that's something that is in view in the text we'll look at, text of the Bible. But also, that's kind of the visible leadership that most people see. Who's your pastor? It means who's going to stand up in front of the church and lead the services broadly. And he would say that should be men. I need to move this up so I don't cut my head off.
So we can see all your books.
All my books and my fishing rod. All right, follow me on that.
Yeah.
Any issues on that? What would you say? Let's do this before we move into our text here. pushback that you're seeing online, I'll just say this. I feel like most of the pushback I see, some of it is from people who think it doesn't go far enough. But I think most of the pushback I see comes from people who think the Southern Baptists don't like women or that it is a repressive thing,
Yeah.
that it is kind of an anti-woman thing. That certainly who you follow on Facebook and
Yeah.
Twitter and what your algorithm is going to affect what you see most often. So it's not really fair for me to say that's what everybody's saying, but it's
Hmm.
what's coming to me the most is that people are like, man, Southern Baptists sure are hateful or bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about you? Are you seeing?
Most
Does
of
that seem right in
most
your
of what I
experience?
see has tended to be negative, but I've learned a long time ago not to let what I see on social media, whether that's Facebook or Twitter or whatever, not to take that as the full picture, because I just think our algorithms operate in such a way that the internet, the algorithmic overlords know a whole lot about us in such a way that they know what we're likely to sort of spend the most time on or read through, and even respond to and interact with, and that tends to be things that we disagree with, because
Yeah.
it kind of foments the rage that fuels clicks in a lot of cases. But
We like controversy.
yeah. And so I have seen several, and I have seen some good responses too, favorable responses. Most of the negative that I've seen, particularly, has been stuff like toward Al Mohler himself, from other prominent pastors or teachers from churches that I assume are not Southern Baptist churches. So they're like throwing tomatoes from the outside,
Yeah.
into the Southern Baptist Convention and what they're doing. And so it does have a lot to do usually with kind of an emotional appeal to how much we value women. And that's always the way that it's framed, from that perspective, is we value women and y'all don't.
That's right.
And we want to free women, y'all want to oppress women. We want to love them, y'all hate them, etc. And I think all of that is just, it's silly.
Yeah.
I could think of a lot of harsh terms to give it, but it's not serious. It's not a serious way to look at the issue
Right.
and discuss it. And so that's my general thoughts.
Yeah. No, I agree. I totally agree. All right. I think it might be, I don't know how you want to move forward. I think that one is to talk about what we think the Bible says about the role of women and pastors and how that connects. One is responding to objections that people might have. And then I'm interested, I don't know if we'll have time, but I'm interested also in just more broadly, what does the Bible say about men and women? And I think one of the issues for me, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and I don't know how much I want to spend on this, but to
As much
me,
as you want.
this is a sliver of a bigger issue. And I think that one thing that people do is we sort of compartmentalize. Well, all I care about is, can women be pastors? And what I really feel like is that this idea of women being pastors is just one little sliver of a bigger idea that God created male and female. And broadly, those are different, complementary. They are equal in image bearing value. God loves them both, but they have different roles and things. And so that applies specifically in the role of pastor. But if you only ask that one question, it feels like a very fragmented secondary, like, I know, maybe the Bible has a couple of verses on this, but it just seems kind of unimportant. Where I would say the broader idea of men and women being different, created at the very beginning, it seems to me a bigger theme, and this is a sliver of a bigger theme, rather than it just, right? So we're all debating, can women be pastors? And I think at the heart of that is God making men and women as two people who bear the image of God, but have independent roles that they serve with each other. So
Hmm.
I feel like if we run down that road first, we'll probably never get to the more narrow issue of women being pastors, because we could spend all day on the broader thing.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with, let's be more narrow first, and we'll see how broad we can get by the end of our time.
Yeah. And so I'll just say for me, like, as we're having this conversation and I refer to egalitarians, I'm probably going to be referencing, and probably you are too, generally, I'm probably going to be just referencing people who think that women can be pastors. And
Okay.
there's other ways to be egalitarian for sure, but that go beyond that and take it into to a more extreme level. But that's generally not what I'm going to mean when I use the term
I think that's helpful
in the conversation.
Let me throw out, I'm assuming that a certain number of people who will listen to us aren't familiar with the terms egalitarian and complementarian, and will probably use those terms because they represent two sides of a debate. The problem, as we even said with pastors, is that sometimes people can have the same vocabulary in different dictionaries. And so what one person means by the word egalitarian might be a little bit different than what somebody else means, and same with complementarian. But let's give broad definitions, and then we'll move on to the debate. How about I'll throw out two broad definitions, and then I'll let you push back on them.
Okay.
Egalitarians, broadly speaking, will recognize that God created men and women, if you're even talking about God existing. So I think broadly in our culture, it would be viewed as an egalitarian world without reference to God. But within the Christian idea of egalitarian, God created men and women. They're different sexually, biologically, but they're not different. The word egalitarian is a form of equal. They're equal or not different with regard to role, the things that they do, or value, right? So that they are equally valuable to God, and there's nothing that is distinctively something that applies to men, and this distinctively applies to women, both in roles of service and action in general. It's just that God created human beings, and sexuality is a function of reproduction, but it's not a function of women should live femininely, men should live masculinely, and God has divided roles that you should live into. So you're equal with regard to value and function or role. Complementarians say men and women are both created by God. They are equal in value because they're both bearing the image of God, but different in role or function. So the way that men live into masculinity, they should not be feminine because there's a difference there. And women should be feminine and not masculine. There's a difference there, and that there's a moral obligation to live within the roles you're created. Within that, you can debate what are those roles, but the broad definitions for me of egalitarian and complementarian is there difference in role, or is there not a difference in role? Complementarians say they're different. Peanut butter and jelly are both on a sandwich, but peanut butter does something a little different than jelly does. And egalitarians would say, essentially, peanut butter, jelly, it's all the same. I mean, there's two different things, but there's no real, we're all equal. We're all the same in every manner.
It's like the kind that just mixes it all together. It's like the debate of should you mix your peanut butter and jelly or keep it separate.
Should it be peanut butter and then jelly, or should you get the swirl?
Just a mixture.
I like that analogy. I like that.
It's not peanut butter. It's not jelly. It's something else.
So those are broad ways of thinking about it. And would you sharpen that, or can you imagine somebody listening and being, well, that's not exactly what I mean?
No, I don't have an issue with that.
Okay. So we are both complementarian. And so we'll use that word that we believe, and I don't know how often we'll use that word, but if you do, and you're like, what in the world do they mean, egalitarian or complementarian? We think God made two genders, two sexes, but two genders, and that there are certain obligations and patterns that you should try to live into if you're a man, and that men should be this way and young men should be this way. We believe that there's some shoulds that are specific to your gender. Same with women. The older women should be this way and younger women should be this way. And there are some shoulds or oughts that are specific to your gender. And it doesn't mean they're mutually exclusive in every way, but there are some separation between male and female.
Yeah.
And that we want to know how that plays itself out into specifically today, the issue of being a pastor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fair?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think somebody on the egalitarian side could look at us and say, well, do you think that women and men are different in their status before God and in their salvation? Like, do men have more of a place in God's favor than women do? And I think we would say, no, that's not true. Like, in that sense, they are equal. And so we probably wouldn't put it that I'm egalitarian in terms of salvation. Like, we probably wouldn't use that language, but like you could push us to that point of saying, yeah, in some sense we are egalitarian in that we believe in an equality, a kind of equality, that men and women are equal in some ways, but not in every way.
Yeah. The way I've always heard complementarianism defined is equal in value, separate in role. And egalitarian is equal across the board, equal in value and equal in role. That they tend to say people are individually gifted, and we'll probably get there later, but everybody's individually gifted in different ways. And so that somebody with this gifting might be called into this job, and somebody with this gifting can be called into this job. But there's nothing inherently that would separate somebody because they're male or because they're female. It just has to do with you. I think it tends to view you more in lines of your personal giftings rather than having gender being an overlay by which we would determine what sort of role you would play in your home or in society, or specifically today we're talking about in the church. Fair?
Yep.
All
so
right.
Why don't we just kind of state where we are, not so much in reference to like what the other view is and why other people think that, but just why is it that we believe what we do about this issue of women as it relates to the pastoral office and function. Biblically, what are the reasons for that? And I've got a few listed out. I'm sure you do as well. Yeah. And we'll just see where that goes.
All right. Well, you want to start?
Sure. So 1 Timothy chapter 2 is kind of the big one, probably the most common one that you hear in relation to this discussion. But and I'll just read some of the context. This is starting at verse 8, I believe. 1 Timothy 2, verse 8 and following, Paul says, I desire then that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness, with good works. Let a woman, and here's where it starts to get controversial, let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. And this is verse 12 now. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. So that's how it reads in the ESV. So you see that idea in verse 12 of Paul saying a woman should not teach or exercise authority over a man.
Mm-hmm. Real quick, before we go there, let's unpack that passage, but just for the sake of lists, for people whose brain likes to get outlines and then unpack the outline. This passage in 1 Timothy and then another one in 1 Corinthians 14 are very similar. Mm-hmm. And I would put those as my most explicit argument against that say men should be pastors, women should not. So these two I put as the top as very explicit. This is the rule. I think 1 Corinthians 11 is connected to 1 Corinthians 14, and so that's going to help us unpack 1 Corinthians 14 a little bit more, so it becomes another passage that you would want to throw in there. And And then after that, I think you get more broadly into some of the grounding of those rules. So now you're talking about patterns of behavior that you see Genesis 1 through 3. How does God establish men and women? Leadership throughout as patterns throughout the Bible, that you have sort of the patriarchs, but you don't have the matriarchs of the Bible. You have, people talk about, well, what about Deborah as the judge? But the reality is that the judges, the prophets, the kings, it's a masculine leadership throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. You have apostles. So you see patterns that establish us. And then you also have the relationship between husbands and wives that's unpacked in Ephesians 5 and 1 Peter 3. That would be the same logic that's applied to marriage is then sort of being connected with what's going on in the church. So what I'm doing is I'm ranking orders of arguments. 2 explicit passages, 1 Corinthians 14 and 1 Timothy, which you just read.
Mm-hmm.
Patterns of behavior, which all throughout the Old and New Testament. And then broader roles that are comparable, especially the relationship between a husband and a wife. Though that's not the only one, but that's kind of like the layout of strongest to weakest. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so you've started with what I think is one of the top 2 strongest places, which is 1 Timothy.
Yeah.
And so I didn't mean to pull us out of there. I don't mind to pull us out. I want to go back to what you said, but I was just trying to lay out why I think that's the right place to start.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, let's go back to what you said. He says, I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. So let me ask you, do you believe that women can never teach men or exercise authority over men and should be quiet always and every time in every context? I've actually heard women speak before. Is every woman who ever speaks in sin? Yeah. So I obviously know, but so what do you make of that?
Yeah. I think the first thing to acknowledge is that Paul is clearly talking in a church context, and he's speaking to the context of a church, and not just the church's life in general, but in the corporate assembly.
Right. So you started back in verse 8 with, he's talking about a church service where men pray, lift holy hands, women dress a certain way. There's singing, I think, involved in this. And then there is, and it's all because he wants the service to be done in an orderly way. And so therefore part of that order is women not teaching or exercising authority. Right.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious what you would say. Do you think teaching and exercising authority are sort of lumped together in this sense, like a kind of teaching that does exercise authority over a man? Do you think that's what's in view?
Yeah.
Or would you kind of keep them separate?
I think there are some places where people could disagree with this, but I'll just tell you my view is that these are, as an analogy first, when the Bible in Matthew 28 tells us to make disciples of all nations, baptizing and teaching, right? So baptizing and teaching are the sort of symbolic ways or the overarching ways in which the task of disciple making is done. I view this as a similar way in which teaching and exercising authority are the functions that define the pastoral role. So I believe that he's not saying there's no place for teaching or exercising authority whatsoever, but they're the descriptions of pastoral ministry. So I think he's essentially just saying women can't serve pastorally, and they cannot teach as the pastor or exercise pastoral authority in the church. But that doesn't mean, so just like in a real practical way, there's all sorts of different kinds of authority that have been handed out in our church to women. Amy does not check with me before she orders tons of supplies that we need for things, and she just does it. It's her authority, and we trust her. Christine runs and schedules all the nursery. She doesn't check with us. She's exercising authority. But that's different than this kind of authority that's being mentioned here, which is the teaching and exercising authority, which is the pastor. So nobody thinks that, oh, is Christine acting in a pastoral role there? So that there is a certain kind of authority and a certain kind of teaching that's in view. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think about, so for an egalitarian that may hear an argument like this or hear this passage cited, I think it's fairly common for people to suggest that this, that the subjugation, quote unquote, of women to men is really the product of the fall. Like it's something that came about because of the fall of man, and they'll look at, Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. And so in Christ, there should be kind of a reversal of the fall that we operate with now, and the text that they would kind of springboard to is Galatians 3, which we'll talk about when we get to the section on their arguments, but there is neither male nor female in Christ. That's an idea you hear from that side. So what would you say about that argument, though, that this hierarchy, if you will, is the result of the fall?
So I think this is where we talked earlier about where you kind of sort of begin your conversation. Are we only talking about whether or not women can be pastors, or are we talking about God's view of the relationship between men and women altogether? But if we're going to start with the relationship of men and women altogether, you would really have wanted to start in Genesis chapter 1 when he makes men and women. And there you can see roles and function that's there before the fall. And in certain ways, they are demonstrated more through the fall. But there's clearly a difference. Adam is made first. That's in 1 Corinthians. It talks about Adam being created first. Therefore, he has a representative headship. And we'll probably talk about 1 Corinthians later.
It actually is in 1 Timothy 2. So you may not have it in front of you, but that was the next thing. That was the kind of the thing that makes me chuckle when I hear that.
Yeah, verse 13. For Adam was formed first, and then Eve.
Right. And then you do see, so it's like Paul does both in that verse. That's what's interesting about it to me, is that he does ground it in the fall to some extent when he says, Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. And that harkens back to the judgment that God gave at the fall, which said that the woman, her desire would be for her husband, but her husband would rule over her. That was kind of the judgment given at the fall. But that's not all that Paul says. So he also grounds it in the fact that Adam was formed first, and then Eve was formed from Adam. So even then, you see a first and second kind of you see a helper relationship there. So that's just always been interesting to me. Paul grounds it in both ways. Yes, I think there's some grounding in the fall, but there's also a grounding in the creation order too.
Yeah. I think in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, you see the beginning of a massive theme in the Bible that we would describe as the ability for someone to act as a representative head, right? Which comes up later in Romans 5 with regard to salvation. That even though Eve was actually the first to sin, in Romans 5 it says, through one man, Adam, sin came into the world, and through one man, Christ, basically salvation, right? And righteousness comes to us. And the point is that God has established a world in which, headship exists, and headship implies, in part, throughout all of Scripture, the ability for one person to be the representative leader or head of a group. And that becomes evident in the garden when God creates man and from man woman, and that the man and the woman both exercise dominion, but the man does it in a headship way. God gives his commands to the woman. God gives his commands to the man, and the man is supposed to tell Adam. He says, Adam, you don't eat. Adam's supposed to lead his wife, and that when she fails, he goes to Adam and says, what have y'all done? Because Adam is operating as the representative head of his family. And that theme plays out. You also have representative heads in the firstborn. The firstborn son is the one who becomes the representative. He gets the inheritance of the family. So first has a representative mark of the family. God does sometimes usurp that in ways that portray the gospel. However, the theme of that representative head is a massive part of the Bible and salvation. And so I think all of that is being demonstrated from the very beginning of creation. It's not something that is like a later tape it on because it's neat. It just really is the foundation, part of the foundation of the logic of the Bible starting in Genesis 1. So I don't know if that's too much, but
Yeah. Do you want to kind of compare and contrast then with 1 Corinthians 14, this passage, the 1 Timothy 2 and the 1 Corinthians 14?
yeah, let's do that.
Because
So
there are plenty of overlapping points.
let me start with connecting with 1 Corinthians 11 is too much to read all of it and 14, but let me talk about the sort of logic of it and then we'll dive into 14. In 1 Corinthians 11, you have this passage about head coverings, and um, it's all related to praying and prophesying. And the rule, it says in verse 3, I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Right? So that there's this headship theme, and that plays itself out in this topic of head covering. Therefore, every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, but every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. Now, this becomes this thing that's a little bit strange to completely unpack, but basically what he says is that if a man prophesies or prays publicly, I think, and his head is not covered, or his head is covered, that would be a weird and shameful thing. But the function seems to be mostly addressing women who are praying and prophesying without their head covered. And it's a hard thing because we don't do head coverings in our society. But my understanding of what head coverings are that have you ever watched Braveheart when he gives his girl like his swath of plaid, and he's like, "This means that you're a part of my family now," and that this cloth that you wear is a representation of you becoming part of that family. I understand head coverings as somewhat like our wedding rings, right? It's a physical symbol of that a married woman would have of coming under the marriage covenant with her husband. It begins in the Old Testament. Boaz covers Ruth with his garment, and that's the beginning of their marriage covenant. Ezekiel talks about how he covers us with his garment, and that's how that begins the covenant of our marriage covenant with God, and that this plays itself out, that being covered with a man's cloth, basically, and that symbolizes over your head, shows that you have come under him as wife. He's your head, and you're not. That's why women who are single don't have head coverings, and women who are married do have head coverings. It's a symbol of marriage union. And he says it's a real weird thing for a woman to get up and pray and prophesy and take that off as if now in Christ, I'm no longer in submission to my husband. I'm no longer under him. It is a de-feminizing thing, and it's a breaking of your role for you to pray and prophesy without your head covered. And he says it's the same as imagine a man dressing up in women's clothing and preaching and prophesying. That's basically what having a man, if his head were covered, if he were dressed like a woman and preaching, you would be like, I'm not going to that church. And he says it's the same thing because it's your clothing represents your roles. All right, that's the logic there. My point is, the reason I bring it up is he's saying that there is a place where women can pray and prophesy when their head is covered in chapter 11. All of that was me saying that women are allowed to pray and prophesy. Then you get to chapter 14, and he says, but women should not speak in church. They should be silent right before the Lord. And so now I'll read this passage. The whole thing is still talking about orderly worship. You come together, there's a hymn, there's a lesson, there's a revelation, there's prayer, prophesying, all of that stuff's going on, and it should all be done orderly. And he says in verse 33, the reason is because God is not a God of confusion, but a God of peace. As in all the churches of the saints, the women should keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but should be in submission, as the law also says. If there is anything they desire to learn, let them ask their husband at home, for it is shameful for a woman to speak in church. And then he goes on with some of the same stuff about, didn't men come first? Aren't they the representative heads? And all that, starting in verse 36. Mm-hmm. So here's the tension that I feel is going on. In chapter 11, he says, if the women are praying and prophesying with their head covered, that's okay, but they should make sure that they're representing that their marriage and their submission to their husband is not lost when they step into church. It's not like, I'm married to you at home, but I'm the leader of this church and I'm the leader of this body when I step into the church, right? You don't take off your head covering. You don't take off your wedding ring when you go to church. Then in verse 14, he says, women shouldn't speak. They should remain silent in church. And the question is that a contradiction or what's going on here? And different people handle it different ways. But what I think is going on here is that there is a form of speaking and prophesying that is even in church or in the church broadly that is okay for women to do, but they cannot speak or lead with regard to the preaching of the sermon in the assembled body weekly. So I think this is, again, talking about women can't be pastors, right? So it's not saying that there's no place ever that a woman could ever speak or pray. And so, again, at our church, well, we do all the pastoral prayers, but we'll have women read the Bible or something like that. We don't believe that this is an absolute, there's no speaking role in the church service or in the church broadly that a woman could ever have.
Yeah.
But there is a recognition that there is a kind of speaking role that the woman shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And that is in the gathered assembly, the preaching of the word in the church service, in your main church service.
Yeah, I think there's a remnant of this, even in the way that we talk. When it says, I don't permit a woman to speak, it makes me think of how we talk sometimes, like, did you go to church today? Who spoke today? Like, obviously, like everybody in the church spoke. They spoke to each other, but we're not talking about that kind of speaking when we say that. We're talking about the main speaking role that a church has, which is the preaching of a pastor.
That's right.
And so, like, when he says, I don't permit a woman to speak, it's reasonable to think that that's what he's referring to there. I don't want a woman to have that primary speaking role to the church collectively.
That's right. And so I think that's where the Southern Baptist statement can't work in the function of a pastor specifically preaching to the assembled congregation. It's not that that's the only thing pastors do or that's the only job description, but that's sort of the visible primary way in which you see pastoral leadership. And they're saying that 1 Corinthians 11, when it says don't speak, women don't speak in church, that's what it's referencing. It's really referencing this sermon. Same in 1 Timothy chapter 2. It's really referencing the sermon, and that women cannot preach to the church in that regard. There may be other kinds of services that the church has that is not the delivery of the sermon to the whole assembled congregation that are appropriate, but that sort of pastoral leadership, the delivery of the sermon to the church, is something that he is saying would be shameful because it would be like a man putting on women's clothes and a woman putting on man's clothes. Basically, it's like transgenderism, which is a whole different issue. But that it is denying the created order in which you were made, and that you should view that as shameful.
And I'll just say, we've got to note this chapter down for multiple future podcast episodes to talk about what does speaking in tongues mean? What does prophesying mean? What does head coverings mean? Like, good grief. This is one of those this is one of those all-timer passages for like controversy and different views and whatnot. But
I've been kind of looking into it, and there's some debate here. But do you know in Song of Solomon, there's a verse that says, his banner over me is love. And we sing a song in my church growing up. He brought me to his banqueting table. His banner over me is love. I don't know if y'all sing that, but
I believe so.
what is the banner? So the banner is a military flag, technically is what that word means. But I think, if I'm understanding it rightly, in the context of Song of Solomon, his military flag becomes her head covering, right? And his military flag that is her head covering, the banner that's over her, is love, right? So it's this big symbolic thing. The reason I bring that up is to say it's really only in modern times that we've said, oh, you think for a woman to submit to her husband is an act of oppression. But the church saying, because I think there's a level of symbolism in Song of Solomon in which this is our relationship with the Lord. A wife's relationship with her husband is like our relationship with the Lord. His leadership over me, my submission to him, is not his oppression of me. It's his love. It's his provision. It's that I can depend on him and be provided by him. His banner over me, his head covering over me is love. And so, again, I think this is just part of the theme of the Bible, that women loved to be identified with a strong, loving, giving husband, because that represented what God is like to us. And I think the New Testament is just saying, hey, don't get rid of that. Keep that. That's good. That's good. All right, let's do a couple practical things. Obviously, I listed out all these other Bible verses, and then I also said we might do some other things. We've already been talking an hour, so we might not do everything else.
Sure, whatever you think. I was thinking about maybe going to the qualifications of elders and overseers, but that may be more. That may be more. I don't know. You could view that as just more supplementary, and like you said earlier, like it's not.
I think we could do that because I think it brings. It's not, but it's really relevant to our church in an interesting way because of the way deacons get thrown in there.
Okay.
So I don't care if it's long.
And there's it's
Jesse said one of his favorite podcasts is 3 hours long. So if we go a little long,
you can
turn it off if you get bored.
Put it on 2x speed if you need to, or just come back later, or whatever. But 1 Timothy 3 is where you see qualifications for overseers, which that gets into what is an overseer in relation to an elder or pastor. Which just to say the point quickly, we would operate with the assumption that elder, pastor, and overseer are the same office, just described in different ways. Three different terms.
Yep.
But anyway, in 1 Timothy 3, you see the qualifications for overseers. Is the word used there. If anybody desires that office, Paul says he desires a noble task. And then verse 2, therefore an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, etc. And he goes on with some other things as well. How he leads his family should be exemplary. But you see there that phrase, the husband of one wife, and it's as if kind of all through these qualifications for elders or overseers, there is an assumption that we're talking about a man here. And so that at least is consistent with what we've already seen from the verses we've looked at before, that this is a man who fills this role. Now, are there more wrinkles than that? I'll let you address.
Yeah, so I'll say something that's very debated. I feel like that case is made stronger, that the fact that he only mentions the husband of one wife and that he only gives qualifications that seem to apply to men is made stronger because in the next section where he talks about deacons, it seems to me that is open to females. So that's debated. But if you go down to the qualifications of deacons, the first part of it, you also have their wives. You also have like some man language in the first part. But then in verse 11, the word there is gunikas, or women. But women can be translated wives or women. And so there's just this debate.
Which has always made me chuckle about Greek and Hebrew as well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the way they referred to their husbands and wives was literally to say, my man and my woman.
I know. I love it. My man ain't doing it. I love it.
Any man of
So
mine better be.
the English Standard Version says their wives in verse 11. I think other translations will not always say wives, uh, but some do. King James does. Um, the New American Standard says women must likewise be dignified. The NIV says wives in the 1984 version. I don't have the updated, but I bet my guess is that it says women. Uh, the Young's literal translation, which I always like to look up, is women. So there's some debate there among English translations. Should we translate this as how deacons' wives must behave in order for the deacon to be qualified? Or are they saying deacons who are men, evaluated this way, if you're a wife, all of that applies, but also, are you a good wife? Right? You can't be
Mm,
a bad wife and a deacon.
mm,
Now, what that implies to me, and I know this is debated, is that women, if there's provision for what women can be like as deacons and not provision for what men can be like as elders, there's a recognition that these two different offices, one is open to men and women, and one is only open to men. That's what it seems like to me. Now, we brought this up to a guy in our church recently, and he says, fine. The problem is, in modern churches, deacons do a lot of the roles of the pastor, because
mm-hmm.
deacons become essentially, in a lot of churches, deacons are the board that the pastor reports to. So if the pastor's doing bad, the deacons, they're the ones that slap his hand.
Yeah.
And it's like the real leadership of the church is that. So the pastor's head covering would be the deacons, essentially. And if that's the way it is, he says, then putting women as the leader of the pastor would be messing with the whole picture that is being there. Like basically the man preaching has symbolically a head covering, essentially.
Mm.
And so he's like, you should just, because of the confusion of so many churches, you should just avoid women deacons. It is my opinion that it's better to make deacons back to what deacons should be, which is a servant role, in which they do all kind of service ministry within the church, but they're not viewed. But there's a difference between pastor and deacon doesn't mean the true leader of the church. Does that make sense?
Make deacons biblical again.
Yeah.
No, but
Matta?
yeah.
No, that's Matt.
Deacon, MDBA. But I think that's good. It was just a random thought that occurred to me is like I've kind of been thinking about Priscilla and Aquila in the back of my mind in getting ready for this podcast, because that comes into play with like the egalitarian response or the egalitarian statement of in defense of women pastors as they think about somebody like Priscilla, who was influential in the church in some key ways. But as I think about the qualifications for deacons here and how there's this interplay between husbands and wives, I almost wonder if like maybe that's kind of a model for deacons. It's like a husband and wife combo. Not that that has to be the case in every case, but there may be something to that arrangement.
I feel that as well. I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that's helpful. I do think that the qualifications for an elder being man, and in my understanding of 1 Timothy chapter 3, deacon being able to be men or women. So again, that's debated, but if I'm understanding it correctly,
Sure.
and I think grammatically I'm certainly within the realm of legitimacy
Reasonableness.
there. Yeah. Then it reinforces that there is an intentional distinction being made between who can be elder and who can be deacon. Now, it is important for me to say that deacons clearly have a level of authority in the church, though it's the same way that in your home, your wife has authority of all sorts of things, and she does things, and she doesn't have to file paperwork with you for every decision she makes. You've entrusted her to act and to do, and like being a wife does not mean don't do anything, right? You would hate your life if that's how your wife was. And the same thing would be true of deacons. There is a level of authority or action, but hopefully you've had enough experiences with healthy marriages where you can say, I see how the husband's leadership of his family is a strong presence that is not oppressive to the woman, but it's clear that the woman feels herself as supporting and following the leadership of her husband. And I think women can do that in the church in all kinds of ways.
It's good.
I'll give you one that I think this would be debated. So I am, and I'm kind of curious if you push back on me on this, it won't hurt my feelings whatsoever. I feel okay with women having teaching roles in the church, but not preaching roles. And that line, you said, well, where do you define that? And I admit that it gets kind of fuzzy at
I
times.
thought you didn't see a difference between teaching and preaching.
So I don't really. So I think preaching is teaching, but I think that there is a clear difference between the sermon and the Sunday school class. Right? And so what I mean by that is that, and I don't know in our church how everybody would feel, but it to me, it's clear that Kathy and Jackie, for instance, have way more knowledge about counseling than you and I do. They've just done so much more work in that area, and they're certified. And so Kathy and Jackie, I would feel comfortable on a Sunday night or whatever for them to lead a class and for me to attend it, because I think I have some stuff to learn from them. And for any men to attend it. There are people, maybe people in our church would say, well, I'd rather them teach the women. And if you want to learn about counseling, go look up a male counselor to learn that from. And I think that's where within the realm of complementarianism, the idea that men and women have distinct roles, where you draw your lines can be a little bit different. But for me, if we have classes and growing and teaching that happen outside of the preaching of the sermon to the church when we're all gathered together, I'm pretty open to that being led by women and for me to sit and learn under it, even though I'm the pastor of the church.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I would be in agreement with all that as well. I think to a degree what we're dealing with when we talk about not the office of pastor, I think the office of pastor is pretty clearly definable just in terms of who has that title, who's given that role. But then what Mohler's SBC statement said was not just in reference to the office of pastor, but the function of a pastor.
That's right.
And that's where it gets into what I think is good. Like I wouldn't want a statement like that to only refer to the office of pastor, because that would mean a woman could do everything that a pastor does, and just because she doesn't call herself a pastor, then it would be okay. But I don't think that's the heart and spirit of this. It's not just a thing to do with titles and names.
That's right.
It's to do with practice. And so, and so when it comes to that area, though, of the function of a pastor, I do think it's inevitable, it seems to me, that there will be a lot of gray area, and it will be, for the most part, people operating with a you know it when you see it kind of mentality. For us to see Kathy and Jackie doing a counseling class, that to me is just, I know it when I see it, and that's not it. You know, that's not pastoral. That's not pastoral authority being exercised there. And so, it's going to be gray to a certain extent. But I feel like life just kind of in general tends to be that way in a lot of things. So So it's exercise wisdom, pray for wisdom, and also pray for a lot of grace toward others who may see things differently.
That's right. I remember a few years ago, the issue in the Southern Baptist Convention, there was a lot of debate over title and function, because a lot of churches hire something like a children's pastor or a youth pastor. And people are like, well, yeah, but is that really a pastor? Like, if they're doing the same job as in your church, you call them children's director. And in this church, they call them children's pastor.
They do the same thing.
And they do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
are you really saying, well, they can't be part of us simply because they use titles differently than us?
Mm.
And so are we talking about function? Are we talking about title? And I think on the whole, responses that I like said we should, in general, seek to use titles in a way that is as biblically clear and helpful as we
Yeah,
can.
agreed.
So in our church, if we ever hire a children's full-time worker, we'll likely prefer to make that a director job than a pastor job, especially if we think having a woman do that would be fine. And it just kind of clears that up. Because I think we both agree that most of what's happening there is not preaching to the church or some of the major counseling things. Though I think women can counsel, but the leadership of the church as a whole would not necessarily fall on the children's director. That said, I feel like it's okay to have a level of grace to people who use same vocabulary, different dictionary. Like,
Yeah.
I get that in the spirit, this isn't what I would do, but I'm not calling that like, you're not Hitler because you just do it differently than me. And there's a level of common sense. We're not talking about active rebellion against God that's happening. It's just confusion of terms. It creeps into society when people do things in different ways. Speaking of that, we
Agreed.
brought up yesterday, some places where people do things differently than us, and we thought it might be good to talk about how you respond to seeing things different. Is this a good time to talk about that, or do we have more that
I'm not recalling exactly, but go for it.
In my mom and dad grew up in a church. It was a Wesleyan church that had I don't think it was a senior pastor, it might have been, but later on he became the pastor. When I was a kid, they were the pastor of senior adults, but they may have been the pastor of the whole church at one point. But it was actually him and his wife were the pastor. So Percy and Agnes Bailey were the pastor of that church. And mom said Agnes was just the lady, which that's old, right? Agnes. You don't hear that anymore. That Agnes was far and away the more engaging speaker. Like Percy, you just love him, great man, put everybody to sleep. And Agnes was interesting and lively when she spoke, and so everybody wanted to listen to Agnes and not him.
Percy and Agnes. Wow, there's two good old names there.
Those are, they were like the oldest looking couple that I ever saw. Like when I imagine what old people look like, I think Percy and Agnes Bailey. I was super young when I remember them. So I mostly remember them by sight. I don't remember having a lot of interactions with them. But I think the way we just talked about it, we would prefer for Agnes not to be called Pastor Agnes.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Agreed.
However,
she's not in the same category as the pro-LGBT, woman pastor who leads the congregation in praying to Mother God, like that's different. And like, I think that for many people in the situation like what you described with Percy and Agnes, there is probably still a sense within them that even though Agnes has that title too, she has it in relation to her husband's authority, and that she's not seeking to usurp that. And so in that sense, I think you would say they're still to some degree complementarian, if that's the way that they look at it.
Yeah.
And there is a distinction there between the headship of the man and the service of the woman. But so I would view that much more favorably, even though, like you said, I still would personally have the opinion that it's not good to broaden out the title of pastor more so than it seems like the Bible leads us to do. So, totally it's in my judgment, it's a one of the times when you show grace and you say, God bless you. You're probably doing great work for the Lord, but we differ on this specific.
Yeah, totally agree.
Hmm.
100%. I think we mentioned earlier about what the algorithms send you on social media and what comes to your mind when you think of female pastors.
Hmm.
That's one. It's not what comes to my mind most of the time based on what I see on social media anymore.
Hmm.
Um, if you drive down Riverside in Jacksonville and you see a church that has a woman pastor, you'll probably also see an LGBTQ flag flying in front of the church. And
A
the
rainbow flag that will not have Genesis 9 written next to it.
Amen. Amen.
Hmm.
So the rise of women pastors in our time, which it's not like it's what feels like a glut of them within at least certain streams of Christianity, come across to me like a protest movement against traditional Christianity and often even the Bible's own teaching on men and women. So that the Bible has been oppressive against women, the Bible has been oppressive against minorities, and that we're trying to bring the Bible and these old ways, we're trying to get rid of that and kill that and have a new liberated view of Christianity. And I think often that is uh, becomes dysfunctional in all sorts of ways. It's not simply that, well, you accept LGBTQ, is that as this spirit evolves and takes form, everything gets thrown off. And so the gospel becomes a social gospel. Are you kind to people? But no belief in inherent sin that needs to be died and somebody has to die on the cross to pay for our sin. Substitutionary atonement is almost always denied in that sphere. It's too big of a brush to say if you see somebody that's a woman pastor, that's where they're at. Because I just talked about Percy and Agnes Bailey. They weren't that way. And so you could find a woman pastor that's not in that sphere at all. But if you're just talking about stereotypes, those stereotypes exist for a reason because it is common, especially within certain streams. And so if I hear somebody say, I go to a church with a woman pastor, it at least a red flag pops up. Is that what you mean?
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's worth knowing that
Yeah.
red flags are reasonable given where we are in our day and time right
Mm.
now.
Agreed.
Um, don't
And
overstep it,
it's,
right?
yeah,
But just be cautious.
it's the kind of thing that when you see it, on the website, pastor, man and woman, husband and wife pastors, it raises the signal of, well, now I kind of need to know what the actual arrangement is, because even though I can think of an arrangement that would be done in that is not as problematic, I still don't know just by seeing it that
Yeah.
it's one of the non-problematic versions or the more problematic versions, and so it does kind of raise the signal and become something. Well, now I gotta figure this out. Where if we just stuck with kind of what I think the Bible is, the way the Bible uses these words, then there wouldn't be that kind of confusion.
Yeah. All right, I have one more line of questioning that if you got time, we'll do this before we shut it down. Um, I feel like one major pushback against everything we've said so far that I hear often is what about gifting? Don't you
Mm,
just see that sometimes women are gifted? Like God's given them a word to say. People love to listen to them. Um, to deny woman pastorhood, are you
mm.
not denying the spirit of God who has moved in them in power in some way? Um, and should we be more worried, I guess, about the letter of the law that we've quoted so far, or more worried about what the Spirit is doing and what we see as obvious gifting?
Hmm. It's a good question, and I think it forces us to think about the role that women do have in the church and the giftings that they have, and what is the proper expression of those. And I would want to lean like as much as possible toward women being given the freedom and the space and the opportunity to use the gifts that they have for the good of the church. I think of somebody that I think is a great speaker, popular podcaster today, which is Alibeth Stuckey. I love listening to her. I mean, she talks about the Bible and her faith and culture broadly in ways that I find insightful and edifying and encouraging. And I would never want to put a cap on that or to muzzle that in any way. I don't think, and I think she would agree with me on this, that a woman has to be in the role of pastor of a local church in order to express those kinds of giftings and benefit the church in that way. So, I just say, so I'm all for it. Go for it. Like in whatever ways you can legitimately, within the guidelines that Scripture gives, use the gifts that God has given you. That's a great thing, and do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think
like speaking at conferences becomes a controversial thing, and it's one of the things where it's like it's gray, and people will see it differently. I tend to view that as okay, because I don't view that as the church gathered collectively. It's like a special opportunity thing, special meeting.
At our seminary, when we were there was a little bit of a debate over the role of female professors at a seminary preparing people for pastoral ministry. And then as they spread out and opened up a college, then that opened the door for more female professors to come in, because there's just some sort of conceptual view. But all of it was sort of, in my opinion, you're kind of rolling around it, not an objective, like this is clearly right and clearly wrong, but you're just trying to honor a spirit there and drawing lines that are a little bit nebulous, but you don't want to just say, I don't care at all about the spirit of what was going on. If it's not a hard and fast rule, it's irrelevant to me. So, and I just have mercy for disagreements there. My own feeling was that some classes were more in line with women professors, but like a literal pastoral ministry class might have been better for men to teach, seeing as they're the only ones that should have been pastors in the first place. But where I draw that line could be different than somebody else, and I'm just okay saying I'm not standing on as rock solid of a ground as I am when I turn to 1 Timothy or 1 Corinthians, and here's what the Scripture says. I'll add one more thing about the gifting thing. I totally agree with every single thing you said, that when you see gifting, it is good to try to give people as much opportunity to use that gift as they can. At the same time, I do not believe that all positions are a meritocracy, right? So what I mean by that is that your call to serve does not mean always that you're the best, the highest skilled person in that position. And that sometimes a person of higher skill may have to learn to lovingly submit to a person who objectively has lower skill than them. And that is not just in the case of in the church as pastor. That's in the case of your marriage. That's in the case of in the law. You may know more about the law than the person arresting you. But if he's wearing the badge, you better submit to him, because he has authority that is vested by the government. And so all those videos of the guys who roll down the window and they throw out minutia of the law, that's a bad spirit of saying, I know more than you, I'm better than you, so I don't have to listen to you. The Bible calls us to recognize authority as being vested in people, and sometimes vested by the government, sometimes vested by God himself. I think many people will recognize something that we knew in our family. My mom was a better reader than my dad. My dad can read fine, but not expressively. Like, if you wanted to read a children's storybook to kids, mom's going to be far more engaging to listen to than dad, because dad's just not as expressive. So there could be this feeling like, well, dad needs to be the one to read all the time. And I don't think, because he's the man and the man should lead, so he should read. I think that's silly. It'd be okay for dad to say, um, no, part of my leadership is recognizing her gifting, and I'm going to let her read for kids' story time at our house.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I don't think mom has the right to say to him, if you want to lead, if you want to read, if you want to lead this devotion, it doesn't matter because I'm better than you. And so therefore, I'm the one who gets to do it. He may have reasons beyond gifting that he thinks this would be good for my family to see me struggle to read, even though you're better at it.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
the idea is that your ability to submit to your leaders is its own kind of instruction in godliness. And the belief that I get to do whatever I want because I'm the best is not the kind of spirit that we want to cultivate in people. And so men try to give women a place to lead along with their giftings, but women don't cultivate that spirit that, well, I'm better than you at this, therefore I should get to do what I want, right? So
Mm-hmm.
avoid that logic to be a driving factor.
Yeah. Agreed.
That's about.
What can we do a lightning round to kind of
Yeah,
close
do a
this
lightning
out?
round. That'd be fun.
The lightning round is going to be typical arguments you'd hear from the other side. People who say women can be pastors, and so
All right.
I'll just throw them at you, and you hit them back, and I may say something too, but then we'll just go to the next. We'll try to do this in under 3 minutes.
Okay.
Here we go. Galatians 3 says there's neither male nor female.
Yeah. Jew or Greek, slave or free.
Mm-hmm.
And that is with reference to how we are saved. That you are not saved in a way that is different. If you're a woman, you're saved by the same way that you're saved if you're a man. If you're a Greek, you're saved the same way you're a Jew.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that gender has ceased to exist, that nations have ceased to exist.
Jew or Greek, Good. I agree with that. It's about our status in Christ. Romans 16, you see a couple of women who seem to have prominent ministry roles. For example, Phoebe, who serves as a deacon, which we've already kind of discussed. But also another one that kind of gets talked about sometimes is Junia, who is, the way she's referred to is kind of interesting because it says something to the effect that she is noteworthy among the apostles. And people have sometimes taken that to mean that she was an apostle. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so first off, I think we've already established women should be doing ministry, and they should have all kinds of things that the church is calling them and equipping them to do. So no surprise that they're deacons. I would just say noteworthy among the apostles. We know the leadership, the apostle leadership of the church is known who they are. You have the 12, and then Judas falls away, and they get Matthias, and I think that just means that these men recognized her skill and her ability and depended on her and trusted her with a lot of things. The same way that you and I would say there are certain women that are noteworthy in our own church for their skills in different areas, and we turn to them often. Yeah,
for sure. Agree with all that. In Acts 18, Priscilla teaches Apollos, and is Priscilla and Aquila together, but Priscilla is one of those who sit down with Apollos and correct him. What does that say about her role?
I think it says that women can teach, but that she's not the pastor preaching in the church.
Yeah, and they're very smart, and many times very smart and knowledgeable, maybe more so than many men are. But
right. I think it is a very small man who believes that to receive anything from anybody else diminishes him. And so that providing leadership to your church or to your family does not mean closing yourself off to learning from your wife or even the people in your church. And I'll tell you that the very first time I preached a sermon on prayer, I preached, Alta Hinkle was in the group. And some of y'all don't know who she is. Joel knows who she is. But it seemed almost silly for me to teach Alta Hinkle when I knew that her prayer life outpaced mine by light years. But Alta Hinkle lovingly listened, but I still learned a lot about prayer from her as well. Anyway, anything you'd add to that?
I don't think so. I think you're just knocking them out of the park. So we'll keep going. Two more I've got. Women in the Old Testament, women in leadership roles in the Old Testament, people like Deborah or Esther. So Deborah is in a position of power. She was used by God. She was a judge, a prophetess, a national leader. What do you say in the face of something like that? Does that have application to the pastoral role as well, or is it different?
Yeah. Okay. So first off, what makes them so notable is how uncommon they are. Right?
Sure.
So I think it's worth saying that there is a clear pattern of husband and wife where the husband has the leadership, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebecca. As you walk through the pattern of Scripture, there are a couple places where that is not the case, but the clear standard of behavior is there's an obvious pattern. Deborah is actually, in many ways, is supporting Barak. She is doing the wifely role, not that she's his wife, but that she's encouraging, leading him, supporting him. And the problem is then Barak doesn't do what he's supposed to do. And so she says, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And she does right by her encouragement and then by finally saying, I'm going to do the right thing here. That's not a pattern of behavior. It's not saying that Deborah is what we should aim for. But I will say this, if your husband's supposed to be leading your family and he refuses to read the Bible to your kids, then don't say, well, that's the spiritual leader I have. Read the Bible to your kids.
Step up and do it.
But in general, that's the noteworthy part of that story is and Judges in general, is the failure of the Christian people to do right. And this one woman who stood up emphasizes the failure of the people, not like, hey, this is God's pattern for the prosperity of his people. And then Esther, I think Esther clearly leads through service and humility. She's not a pastor. Sure.
Right. Yeah. Another thing I'll throw in there is, I believe it's Isaiah 3, where Isaiah indicates that it's a sign of God's judgment. Really, it's a bad sign in a nation when they are led by women, and and it kind of gets into a debate that Christians can probably have about whether women should be president, for example, or lead in those highest civil ways, but. Avoiding that, just the spirit that the Bible seems to have in regard to this is that, just like you said, the pattern is for men to lead. And when that doesn't happen, it's a sign of God's judgment.
Yeah.
Even though Deborah herself had the right heart and the right spirit and was used of God in her circumstances, like you said, it's not the target we should aim for.
I know we're doing lightning round. This is too big of a topic, but let me just make one quick mention on that. I think that we talked yesterday about a natural law argument. And so people who don't necessarily hold the weight of Scripture the same way we would, I think can still see that God's design benefits society. And that as that design crumbles, society itself takes a negative things come into it. So I think largely we can see that God has given men and women roles. That doesn't mean that they're always the way the man leads, provides, protects, and the woman nourishes and takes care of the home is good for society at large. When large swaths of society, women quit being at home, they don't raise kids, the influence of women is less felt at home and more felt outside the home. The fabric of society itself will suffer because it's just the general rule. Now, that doesn't mean that no woman could be a good CEO or no dad can help nurture his children, but that we see as it plays out, there's deleterious, there's negative effects on society when you begin to see a disregard for the way the home and society is built with male and female roles. And so I think it's negative. I think that's kind of what that judgment there means, that society is not as good when you go in that direction.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this to my mom, so she was okay with like, hey, I get Percy and Agnes, and that was the church we grew up in. She said, that's not really a big deal, is it? And I'm like, well, not the biggest deal in the world, but not the way I would do it. But mom never denied that homes in which there was a very weak man and a very domineering woman, where those roles seem to be reversed, they were not good. Like there was a blessing in the vast majority of her experiences to a husband who led his family well and a wife who nurtured her family well. And when those roles seem to be usurped, the vast amount of experience, I see that working itself out in negative ways, that men should be called to be the head of their home and women should be called to loving support and respect of their husbands, because over a large sample size, you can see the benefit of doing it God's way and the negative effect of breaking God's way.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, moving on.
Good. And then the last one, the women at the tomb. This is one that kind of surprises me that I hear it so often, and I hear it even from pretty respectable Bible teachers, but that the women at the tomb, they were the first to the tomb, and they were the first to be told to go back and declare the message that Jesus was raised again, which is true. And I'll just give my response to that, is that it's kind of similar to other responses we've had to these, is that is not saying anything to the role of pastoral ministry that we see later in the organized church. And so it's just not applicable. It has a strong emotional appeal, because I do think there's great significance to the fact that women are the ones to first experience that and encounter the resurrection of Jesus and then proclaim it. But it's not speaking to the role of a pastor. The Bible will get to the places where it wants to define the role of pastor, and that's what we should listen to when it comes to that.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
And I might throw in there too the fact that Jesus had many disciples, many of which were women. Sometimes they're described as women of great means, who helped and funded the ministry.
We talked about that in Luke. I think it was chapter 8, but I can't remember for sure.
Yeah. So Jesus had many disciples, many of which were women, but when it came to choosing the leaders of his disciples, who were the 12, whom he called apostles, those were all men. Now, that's not to say, that's not to say a pastor, the role of pastor is exactly equivalent to the role of apostle, but there is a pattern there that's consistent between the two, it seems.
Exactly right. They're not exactly equivalent. But if Jesus is a book that I think is really helpful, this is Kevin DeYoung, Men and Women in the Church. And he writes in the introduction, this is not the best book you'll ever read on this topic, but it's probably the shortest. It's this long. Most books on this topic go into every argument, and they're detailed arguments with tons of scriptures and tons of research. This is kind of an overview of what's going on there. I think it's a really good place to start. But essentially he says, Jesus is revolutionary in the way he honors women in his culture. There's just no doubt that Jesus' care for the poor and the marginalized, it's just kind of a radical thing that he does. And that the fact that he starts in Galilee, the fact that he calls women, the fact that women have a significant role in his ministry, all of these things are compelling aspects about the ministry of Jesus. And so in some ways, he was very countercultural. And yet, he didn't counter this. And so it's a pretty strong argument that is essentially what they're saying is, well, he would have, right? He just did. But he picked 12 people to be his disciples, and every one of them were men. And that doesn't mean that men are better than women, but it meant that as he changed some things, he seems to very clearly and intentionally not change others. And so if he had only picked one disciple, then you could have said, well, it's 50-50 had he picked a man or woman. But when you have 12 and all 12 of them are led by men, then it seems like, well, the pattern is much less attributable to happenstance. Right? There seems to be a pattern that is intentional, especially given that Jesus does seem to be countercultural in the way he honors women in so many other ways. And so it's not out of sight, out of mind for Jesus. His interaction with women is very intentional. And the fact that he doesn't change this, that he keeps that pattern, and it seems very clearly his way, shows an intentionality, I think. And I find that compelling.
That's good. Yeah, agreed. So we've put it to rest for all time.
Yeah, probably not. But
but
at least,
it's been a good statement.
At least you know where we stand.
Where we are, what we think about where other people are, etc.
Yeah.
So that's what we think.
All right.
And we don't know what's going to
happen.
We don't know what the next topic is going to be necessarily. We may go back to the ethical stuff that we talked about last week. Maybe we'll do that next week.
Yeah,
or maybe it'll be something new that is brought to our attention that our people want to hear about, or that people are talking about online. Whatever. We just want to.
Let me mention something about the Southern Baptist Convention one last time before we close it off. I didn't say this earlier. Just if you're curious and you're following the story, the Southern Baptist Convention, in order to create a constitutional amendment, has to vote in approval by a 2/3 majority or more 2 years in a row. And so they've done it the first year. This topic will likely continue to be hotly debated for an entire year preceding the next convention, even though it was voted 75% almost to 25%. It seems very likely it'll pass. But you have 1 year of desperate attempts to either convince people to go one way or the other. So I expect it will be a conversation that you'll be, maybe not from us all the time, but you'll probably see online a lot over the next year, because there's another vote that has to happen before it becomes an official part of their Constitution. So for what it's worth.
Yeah, so people will be talking about it. So we're going to put it out into the internet, and maybe somebody will come across it and find it helpful. So,
all right. Let us know what you want us to talk about next. If you don't, it'll probably be ethics, and if you do, we'll maybe give you a shout out.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Find the stop button. Bye.